Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the Ford F-250 Super Duty 7.3 liter in the snow. We're getting a great Super Duty Snow test in here. Kind of the last probably major snowfall we're going to get this year. I'm actually up in Northern Maine. This is just kind of a video basically talking about some of the differences between driving this vehicle in heavy snow compared to a half-ton, compared to just other models, trucks and stuff like that in general. So I really have yet to see a lot of good YouTube videos on this where people just take a real-world foot snowstorm, and in this case it was kind of the perfect scenario because it was a foot of snow turned into an ice storm. I was up in Northern Maine, kind of by Sunday River, actually right near Sunday River Ski Resort, and they got about a foot of powder, so like just regular snow. But down closer to Portland area, where I was staying for the night, they had gotten about 50% snow and 50% ice. So this truck got snowed on about 4 or 5 inches where I was staying, snowed on the entire day while we were doing stuff, came back and got snowed on more and then iced on, and then I woke up Sunday morning. The first things first, I just kind of want to talk about overall driving experience compared to my half-ton, and then we'll move into some of the kind of particularities of this specific brand and model of vehicle, and then we'll kind of go from there. So, first things first, this truck empty is 7,000 pounds. My 05 Silverado is about 5,200. A modern Silverado is about 52 to 5,500. Okay, so this thing is about 1,500 pounds plus heavier than those kind of trucks. I've driven, a half-ton now for 170,000 miles, and I just started driving this thing. I've got about 4,000 or 5,000 miles on it now, which is actually crazy because I haven't owned it that long, but anyway. So the number one biggest thing I want to point out is the tires on my half-ton at the end of this winter were getting pretty worn out, but they're Goodyear Renko Duratracs. These are the Goodyear like Adventure ATs or whatever these things come with, the Kevlar Goodyears, and they're pretty worn out as well. Biggest deficit so far is these 38,000 mile tires, which we will talk more about. So wear for wear, we're actually kind of similar on tires. The tread on the Silverado, I'd say I'd give the tread pattern definitely the edge in the snow to those tires. So as I talk about all this stuff, keep in mind that it's a little bit apples to oranges because those tires in the Chevy were probably a little bit better than the tires in this truck. All that being said, number one, when you have traction and you're just driving around, you don't notice the weight of the truck that much. I guess where I noticed the weight of the vehicle the most was driving kind of slow speeds in town. It takes a little more effort to get it to turn. I did find myself using four-wheel drive probably more often than I would have in the Chevy. Again, tires make a big difference. I would say the tires on this are worse, so that might change. However, the biggest thing is this has the electronic locker in the rear end. My Chevy had a automatic G80 rear locker. And what I will say about that is with the Chevy, it would automatically do its thing. And as much as people hate the G80s, mine seemed to work well. It never actually broke after 248,000 miles. And it seemed to lock and unlock when it should have. So I never didn't like it. I was always a big fan of it. This setup that I have now with the electronic locker, I would say I'm still do like more because I can just pull the knob out and it's fully locked in all the way to 20 miles an hour and then it self-unlocks. That I don't love. I do wish it was fully locked to about 30 or 40 miles an hour. We'll talk about more about that later. But it is what it is. The number one thing I noticed is when you have the rear end locked in, as you would expect, turning becomes pretty difficult. So around town, I'd kind of forgotten I had it locked in. And around town, I was taking some corners and I'm like, why? Like, these tires aren't that bad. Why is this truck just plowing through the turns? This is ridiculous. And then it kind of dawned on me, oh yeah, dummy, the freaking locker's on. So I turned the locker off and the truck started turning the way it should have, which was good. But then when you hit the straightaways, unless you kept pulling the locker in and out all the time, you then wouldn't have the extra traction in the locker. So that's where the auto locker's kind of nice because like it just does it for you. I mean, there is something to be said for that. You know, while you're driving, it lets you corner, it lets you go straight, and it generally works pretty well. Having a solid front axle and just a heavier truck, I definitely noticed the engagement of four-wheel drive is a little longer, it's a little more clunky, it's just more old school, right? The way that a Ford, especially with the vacuum hubs and everything, the way that they lock into four-wheel drive, it is a little bit more crude than that, even that 05 half-ton, where it just, it throws the front axle disconnect and it throws the transfer case in, and it's like super seamless. It's really, really comfy and smooth. So I will say, like, this truck definitely is more of a truck, so to speak, the way it feels when you lock into 4x4. That's neither here nor there in my opinion. It really doesn't bother me. But just worth observing, I guess. I never used the 4x4 auto mode in my half-ton, but it did have that, which was nice, I guess. I don't know. I never really found much use for it. So I was legitimately driving through anywhere from 3 to 12 inches of snow. That is not an exaggeration. Some roads were just unplowed halfway throughout the day, and a lot of roads have been hit like once, maybe twice, right? But we got her fully snowed up here. It's not as much snow here, but there was a ton of snow up northern Maine. There's snow everywhere. So we'll talk about all the different things I discovered. You'll see that video. There probably won't be as much snow on the ground, but look at how caked all that up is. Nothing unusual for people in the Northeast. So there was a lot of ruts and a lot of snow and the edges of the road where you really couldn't tell where the edge of the road was. And in the scenarios where you inevitably hit a rut or hit the edge of the road and things like that, I did notice that this truck definitely, it just gets sucked in a little easier. It's a little bigger and heavier, trying to get it back up on the road surface or, fight a rut. It's heavier. It's a bigger vehicle. Now, on the flip side, I do also think it was a little less floaty in certain scenarios. When you hit that real deep snow, it would just kind of, even with these kind of tires, it would plow through it pretty good, whereas the Chevy sometimes would be wiggly because it was just floating on top of the snow. Overall, they both do fine, so like that's not an issue, and I never got stuck driving in any of these conditions on the road. However, what did happen, which I thought was kind of interesting, is I was trying to go up this, trying to go to a maple syrup farm thing, up this real steep mountain grade, and their driveway to it was just like a 1.5 lane plowed driveway. It was not like a road, right? And it was super, super steep. And I'm talking, 15-20% grade steep, like real steep. And it was snowy and it was icy because it had really been so wet a week before, or multiple weeks before this snowstorm hit, that the ground is just soaking wet, right? So when that snow hits it, it just creates ice, and then it creates a layer of snow. So it was slippery. I'll give the truck credit for that. But and I was actually pretty impressed. I threw the locker and I threw it in four-wheel drive, obviously. I get some good momentum. I start climbing the hill, and it was doing just fine. And then I hit this like off-camber, pretty sharp hairpin left-hand turn, and because the locker was locked in, it just was pushing the truck straight. And I'll be honest, I think with an auto locker that still would have happened. I'm not really sure. That'd be kind of an interesting experiment to run. But I turned the locker off as quick as I could, but it was like too late, right? I think it stays locked in until you let off the gas again, and or it just had enough momentum going dead straight. So I had to stop. When I stopped the truck, lost all my momentum, and I'm trying to turn on the hill, which just wasn't having it. So at that point, just to give you an idea of how slippery it is, I kind of got the truck sideways trying to turn myself around and go back down, because I did have length at that point to turn around. And it was the only option I had because I couldn't go up, and at the angle I was at, I couldn't back down either. And the whole truck just slid like 10 feet sideways on the side of the tires. The whole front end slipped because it was just that icy underneath. So it was the kind of scenario where you really needed chains if you really wanted to get up it, or just like a tracked vehicle or something like that. It just didn't, it just wasn't a road condition that a normal vehicle on normal tires could handle of any sort, right? But it was cool to see the truck as it slid sideways, and it actually nosed me perfectly down the hill. And then I started sliding down the hill straight, and I'm like, this isn't good because I really wasn't straight enough. But I knew if I let off the brake and I could get my steering back, I could probably guide it down the trail. I just didn't want to risk picking up so much speed that I was going to like blow through the end of the trail into the snowbank, because it did take like a jog down, had a turn at the end of it. Luckily, it was a little less icy there, so I said a couple curse words. I actually got the truck nose down. I backed up a little bit that I could, got it repositioned, and I made it down no problem. And like the ABS really like didn't fight me too bad or anything like that. So like that was all good. That worked as expected. It definitely did have you could really tell the truck was heavy at that point. Just a big old freaking 2500 series truck, right? Whereas I do think the Chevy, my half ton, I do think that if I just kind of stuck her to the boards and got her around that turn and got the ass end kicked out just right, I probably could have just nailed the throttle and got up it just with kind of brute force, and just the truck's lighter. But maybe not, maybe I would have been just as stuck. It's hard to say. But that is a disadvantage of a 2500, right? Like the thing is just, it's heavy. It's big and it's heavy. And if you're trying to do like off-roading shit, not that I was like going off-roading, but I had a place I wanted to go that was up a big, steep, snowy grade, and you're going to hit limitations. And now that half-ton truck, again, could have hit a limitation compared to a Jeep or compared to a four-wheeler. Everything has its threshold. Just something to keep in mind. I mean, hey, maybe the ground pressure of these tires, because the truck's heavier, actually made it better, and I would have gotten even less far up with the half-ton. Who knows? Something that people don't talk a lot about that I think is super important with snow driving, and just like your experience in the snow with a vehicle in general, is the kind of the performance of it when it's parked and you have to clear snow off of it. Like how is it designed in such a way that it facilitates that? My Chevy, for example, the 05, a lot of straight body lines and curves that snow and ice would kind of fall off of, and things typically wouldn't get too locked up from ice. And like the tailgate area, the bumper was nice and flat, and you could push the snow off of it and open the tailgate. Just little things like that. However, the extended cab doors in the wintertime on those older Chevys are terrible. Absolutely terrible. Even just like the door handles are kind of weak, so if you got ice in the door and you're trying to pull it open, you would wind up ripping the door handle off the door if you weren't careful. So I had that exact scenario happen, which I put on video. Folks, so the snowstorm has stopped. However, it is so hard. Got a lot of icy rain. You can see on this vehicle here. So we're gonna see if the mirrors open up when I unlock this, or if they're stuck in place. Let's see if this whole power fold mirror thing is good. Look at that. Ooh, a little crunchy. That one go? Oh yeah. Looks like they both went fully out as well, so that's good. To prove to you that it's icy. Oh. And the four door handles are pretty tough, I'd say. I mean, any door handles in any car are kind of weak. Like, they're all plastic, right? It's not like the old days where they're freaking steel door handles. Well, that is what it is. But they're pretty tough. Like, I felt fairly confident that they weren't going to rip off. And I just gently, massaged the door and got it to open. So that was fine. That was good to see. And then, like, the tailgate, I don't like how the bumper on the 22s kind of curves up. All right, so one thing I've noticed driving this thing in the snow piles up, right, on these corners here. And then, of course, it piles up in the corner here. So it creates like a choke point that you got to kind of clear out. If that was just a straight bumper, then it would fall off a little easier. It's kind of dumb that it cups it, and you go to open your tailgate, and you dent your tailgate when it opens. But they did change that for 2023, so I guess somebody thought of this. So, just a dumb little design thing that Ford did that makes it harder for a snowy environment. The windshield wipers and all that kind of stuff are fine. Placement's pretty good. You can clear snow off of them. Having the windshield washer fluid squirters on the cowl, I think is the best blend of accessibility, like through snow and ice, but also making it the most useful. Because on my Chevy, they're on the wiper stocks, which is great because they work almost all the time. They don't get frozen up, hardly ever. But they don't really spray the window down as good. When they're on the cowl, they spray the window down better, but they do get frozen sometimes. And when they're on the hood, like Ford used to do it on a lot of their vehicles, they would get frozen up all the time. They never worked, I found, because I had an Explorer with them back in the day. So I think in the cowl is like a good blend of useful for not getting frozen up, and also useful for giving you the best spray pattern so that the windshield actually gets perfectly clean. However, I think I actually would take the Chevys on the arm because like you just ran it longer and it cleaned the windshield fine, and then they never froze up. So I think I actually prefer that, but that's a very, very minor point. Power folding mirrors seem to be fine. They've been going in and out all day, no problem. The only other really functional issue, of course, all of the backup sensors are covered, so they don't work anymore, which is to be expected. The cross traffic alert, all that's covered. Rear backup camera, I keep clearing off. But other than that stuff, you know, everything else is functioning well, of course. I did lose function of the front-facing pre-collision warning deal. I'm not actually sure where that lives in the front end of this thing, but it actually took like 5 hours of driving for it to finally ice over or snow over and not work. So I was impressed how long it lasted, and it gave me a warning on the dash, so I knew I didn't have it. It took quite a bit of snow and quite a bit of like debris on it to actually make those sensors not work, which I really surprised me, because one of my things with the self-driving Teslas and all that is I always say to myself, oh, what the heck do you do in the snow? Like, how are you ever going to make something self-driving for snow usage? And not to say that we're there yet, but if this collision warning sensor, the cross traffic and the rear parking sensors, and the mirror blind spots are any indication on this thing, a lot of that stuff still worked, or mostly worked. So there's a lot of snow on this vehicle, and there's snowing out like crazy outside. So if you had enough redundancy and enough design and engineering in it, I could see where you could get some of these sensors to still work, even when the conditions are not so adequate. But I think we'd have a lot of work still there to do, so I'm not going to overhype that. As far as like power and stuff, I mean, obviously it's fine going through snow. This thing can tow freaking 14,000 pounds, right? I think if you drive through a little bit of thick snow, you don't even know that you're really working the engine more. Fuel economy was terrible. I mean, I drove around in 4-wheel drive for 150 miles total that day probably, so I got like 12 or 13. I could check and put it in here when I'm done. Yeah, I mean, I didn't expect much. I was also like bumming around town or driving through the mountains. I mean, there was no prediction or no expectation there that I was going to get good mileage. And to top it all off, I had 4 people in the car and all ski gear, or in the truck and all ski gear. So that is what it is. Again, 2500 series truck, it's going to get the mileage it's going to get when it comes to stuff like that. Temperatures, coolant temp and everything was fine. Sometimes snow will get on your grill and you'll overheat a vehicle in the middle of winter. Kind of crazy. If you're not from the north country, you probably haven't seen that before, but I've seen that. Slush and snow will build up and it'll literally clog the radiator. That was fine. That totally could have happened too. That was fine. The running boards on this that come factory, they didn't clog up too awful bad with snow, really. They definitely eventually you kind of had to like get your hand or your foot and peel the snow out of them because they're not an open back, but they weren't too bad. I think I'd prefer an open back, but yeah, for free in stock, they aren't terrible. I think overall my review of this thing in the snow is pretty positive.